You can spend half your life building something real, and the people who raised you will still introduce you as the one who never figured it out. I learned that at 31, standing in a hotel ballroom 2 hours from home, wearing a wool coat I'd paid too much for, watching my mother explain my failures to a man whose quarterly reports crossed my desk every 90 days. My name is Claire Hoffman. What happened in the next 4 minutes, and what my father did 72 hours later, is why I'm finally telling this. The email came on a Wednesday. Not from my mother. She doesn't send invitations, she has my sister do it, so you understand the hierarchy before you even open the attachment. Dad's celebration dinner, March 9th, wear something appropriate, his supervisors will be attending. I read it twice in my office between reviewing a logistics contract and approving payroll. Then I did something I hadn't done in years, I laughed out loud with the door closed. His supervisors will be attending. I run a company called Orion Systems Group. We're not Fortune 500. But we're substantial enough that I haven't manually signed employee checks since 2015. We employ people who employ people who employ people. And buried 4 ownership layers deep in our acquisition portfolio was a mid-sized manufacturing plant in Colburn, Pennsylvania, the place where my father, Dennis Hoffman, had worked quality control for 37 years. My sister Vanessa didn't know this. My mother didn't know this. My father, who'd spent nearly 4 decades inside that building, didn't know it either. I didn't reply immediately. I'd learned years ago not to respond to my family in real time. Instead, I looked at my calendar and made a choice that felt minor. I would attend, as myself, with my actual name on the guest list. And I would let the evening unfold however it needed to. For 11 years, my family had introduced me with a single, polished sentence. Claire didn't finish school, she's doing some kind of delivery work, I think. She never really found her direction. The wording shifted depending on the audience. But the conclusion never did. I was the daughter who hadn't made it. At first, I corrected them, gently. I mentioned owning the delivery vehicle, then owning several, then a warehouse. Each correction disappeared like breath on glass. My mother would nod, smile, and redirect the conversation to Vanessa's promotion or their kitchen remodel. So I stopped. Not because they'd worn me down. I stopped because I finally understood I was asking the wrong people to validate my work. You don't hand your results to someone who's already graded you a failure before you walked in the room. I had a business to build, routes to manage, payroll to meet. None of that required my mother's approval to be real. I let them keep their narrative. I showed up for holidays I couldn't avoid, complimented the new backsplash, and drove back to my own life by Sunday evening. It wasn't surrender. It was the cleanest form of boundary I knew how to build. What I didn't understand yet, what took a ballroom and 60 witnesses to teach me, was that some stories don't just sit quietly in the corner. Eventually, someone tells that story to the one person in the room who knows it's false. Let me take you back 11 years, to the kitchen where this actually started. I was 20, home for winter break. I'd left college mid-semester, not failing, just finished with it. I'd found contract work that made sense to me, driving parts between suppliers. I slept in the cab. I'd done the math. I could buy my own vehicle for $14,000. The margins worked. I just needed a co-signer for the loan, standard practice for someone with no credit history. So I brought it home. I wrote the whole plan out by hand, routes, expenses, repayment schedule. I made it as clear as I could. I set it in front of my father after dinner. He read it slowly, the way he read everything, glasses low on his nose. Then he picked up a pen, wrote 6 words at the bottom, and slid it back. No, go get a serious job. He signed it, Dad. Like a verdict. My mother was at the sink. She didn't turn around. She's never going to amount to anything, Dennis, you know that. Not angry, not even disappointed. Just factual, like commenting on weather. I didn't argue. I took the paper back, folded it into eighths, and put it in my wallet. I've carried it for 11 years. Not to stay angry, I don't have time for that. I carry it so I'll never again ask the wrong people to approve my life. I got the loan another way, through a credit union and a loan officer named Martin who liked my numbers more than my age. I bought the vehicle. That's the whole origin. No inheritance, no lucky break, no investor who swooped in. 1 vehicle, then 2, then 3, when I hired someone I trusted to drive. There were winters I almost lost everything, once to an engine failure, once to a client bankruptcy that left me unpaid for 16 weeks. Both times, I climbed out alone. I learned freight, then warehousing, then the quiet, undervalued art of acquiring small suppliers whose owners were aging out with no succession plan. I kept their people, kept their names on the buildings, folded the back office into mine. That's how Orion grew, one tired company at a time, Until the structure on paper looked nothing like the girl with the handwritten plan. 3 years before that celebration dinner, Orion made the largest acquisition we'd ever attempted. A holding group called Dalton Industrial, mid-market, regional, owned a collection of manufacturing and supply businesses across the Midwest. I'd been studying it for 18 months. It was a share purchase, meaning we bought the parent entity. Everything underneath stayed intact, same buildings, same managers, same employee badges. As far as anyone on the floor knew, nothing changed. One of those businesses, buried in the subsidiary schedule, was Hoffman Lang Manufacturing, Colburn, Pennsylvania. My father's plant. I knew it when I signed. I want to be clear about that, it wasn't an accident. I saw his employer in the documentation, and I felt something I didn't have clean language for. And I bought the company anyway. Then I didn't tell anyone in my family. Not to set a trap, I need you to understand that. I stayed silent because I'd stopped explaining my life to people who'd already written the ending. They had their story, I had work to do. The fact that both now shared an address was just a private irony I carried, folded small, next to a piece of notebook paper. Last summer, I went home for a family gathering. My mother pulled me into the kitchen, by the elbow, smiling toward the other room. The smile was for them, the grip was for me. When people ask what you do, she said quietly, just say logistics, don't overcomplicate it. I could have told her right then, could have ended 11 years of this in one sentence. I didn't. I said, sure, Mom, logistics. Went back outside, ate pasta salad, let her run the afternoon the way she needed to. I told myself it was kindness, that I was sparing her discomfort. That was the lie. Here's what I got wrong, and it took a ballroom full of witnesses to show me. I thought silence and strength were the same thing. They're not. Silence is just a closed door, and sometimes, that door lets someone stand on the other side and rewrite who you are while you say nothing and pass the salad. The celebration wasn't small. My mother had been planning it for weeks. The Grandview Ballroom, the nice one with the crystal lighting, the kind of place people in that town reserve for weddings. 60 people on the list, 37 years is a long career, and the plant showed up, floor workers, team leads, front office. My mother's book club came, Vanessa came with her husband, Tim. There was a banner, Dennis Hoffman, 37 years of dedicated service. A slideshow looping on a screen, a microphone for speeches my mother had pre-approved. She'd built the evening like a monument, to a respectable family, a steady man, one daughter who'd done well. And the other daughter. Well, we don't talk about what she does. I drove in that afternoon and checked into a hotel off the highway, because I'm a visitor in that town now. I wanted my own space at the end of the night. I hung up the good coat, sat on the edge of the bed, and thought about the one detail nobody in that ballroom knew. The plant's director of operations would be there. His name was Andrew Finch. I'd sat across a table from Andrew Finch every quarter for 3 years. I knew exactly what he looked like. And I knew the moment he saw my face, the story my family had been telling was going to meet the one person who could fact-check it. I almost didn't go. 11 years of being the family's disappointment does that to you. But something told me to put on the coat and drive over. If you've ever walked into a room that decided who you were before you arrived, you know what that felt like. The doors opened, and my mother found me in under 30 seconds. She did her usual scan, shoes to hair, and you could watch the judgment assemble behind her eyes. Oh, you made it. Her tone said the opposite. Try not to bring up the trucking thing tonight, these are your father's colleagues. Then she steered me toward one of her friends with a hand on my shoulder. You remember our other daughter, Claire. Not our younger daughter. Our other daughter. The friend smiled the smile people give a story they've already heard. I smiled back, because I'd eaten this meal 100 times before. Vanessa found me next, half a hug, eyes flicking to my handbag, then away. Tim shook my hand and said nothing, which was the most honest interaction I had all night. Across the hall, near the stage, stood my father, shaking hands, glowing in a way I hadn't seen in years. 37 years of belonging, all gathered in one room. I felt something soften, watching him. And then I remembered, I was the only person in the building who knew the company he'd given his career to now rolled up, 4 layers deep, to me. Vanessa cornered me by the drinks table. She had white wine and a grievance, her 2 signature accessories. You could have at least helped with the catering costs, she said, not looking at me. Some of us actually carry the weight in this family. I told her the event looked beautiful, I meant it. She heard it as deflection. What I knew about Vanessa, what everyone knew but didn't say, was that she and Tim were underwater. There'd been a bathroom remodel they couldn't afford, a second car, a pattern of small loans from our parents that everyone pretended were gifts. Vanessa needed the family structure to stay exactly as it was, her at the top, me at the bottom. Because that arrangement came with benefits, an inheritance she'd already mentally spent, a role as the responsible one that justified the help. If that floor ever shifted, Vanessa had a long way to fall. So she kept the story polished. Kept me small in it. Not out of cruelty, exactly. Out of need. Just, she said, lowering her voice as our mother passed, don't make tonight about you. I told her I had no intention of making it about me. It was the most honest thing I said all evening. I didn't have to make it about me. My mother was about to do that herself. My father was holding court near the bar, telling the story about the winter power outage when he slept at the plant for 3 nights to keep production running. The guys around him laughed in the right places, they'd heard it before, that was the point. Someone, one of the younger guys, asked about his family. You've got kids, right, Dennis? My father's face did the thing it does. Vanessa's in finance, he said, easy and proud, married, 2 kids, really sharp. Then the pause. The small adjustment. And Claire's? I think she does delivery driving, we don't see her much. The man had worked inside a building I owned for 3 years, and he didn't know what his own daughter did for a living. He wasn't being cruel. That's what made it land the way it did. He simply had never been curious enough to ask. Because the family had a slot for me, and I fit in it, and filled slots don't get questioned. The only warmth in that circle came from a man named Lewis Grant, early 60s, my father's longest friend at the plant. He'd slipped me a piece of gum at a company picnic when I was 9 and never once treated me like a footnote. Lewis caught my eye, broke off from the group, and came over. Claire Hoffman, he said warmly, tell me what you're actually doing these days, and don't say driving. I gave him the short version, that I ran a company now, that it had grown past what I'd expected. He nodded like a man who'd always suspected as much. Knew you had it in you, he said, you were the only one of those kids who ever actually wanted to work. Before I could respond, my mother's voice cut across the room. All right, everyone, please find your seats, we're going to start the speeches before dinner gets cold. She moved through the hall like a director, positioning people. I watched her place Vanessa near the microphone. Vanessa's going to say a few words on behalf of the family, she announced. On behalf of the family. There were 2 children, one of them was standing right there, uninvited to speak at her own father's celebration. I wasn't surprised, and I want to be honest, I wasn't hurt the way I would have been at 20. I didn't need the microphone. I've spent years learning that the people holding the mic aren't always the people holding the power. So I found my seat near the back, where they'd placed me, the family table's outer orbit, and I sat with my water glass and watched my mother conduct her evening. And that's when the side door opened. A broad man in a gray suit stepped in, shaking rain off his shoulders. Andrew Finch. My father's boss. My quarterly report. My mother hadn't noticed him yet. I had. I'd sat across a conference table from Andrew Finch a dozen times, maybe more. Every quarter, Orion runs an operations review for each business in the portfolio. The site directors come in and walk us through performance. Andrew ran the review for Hoffman Lang. He was good at it, no spin, clear numbers, the kind of operator I trusted. He knew my name. He knew my face. He knew, in a way my own father didn't, exactly who signed off on the budget that kept his facility running. So when Andrew Finch stepped into that ballroom and scanned the room, the way managers always do, his eyes landed on mine and stopped. I watched it happen in real time. The frown of recognition, the mental gears turning, trying to place the owner of his company at a retirement party in Colburn. He started to lift a hand. Started, I think, to come over. And I did something I hadn't planned. I gave him the smallest shake of my head. Not now, not yet. He caught it, sharp enough to see it, decent enough to honor it. He let his hand drop and turned toward the bar instead, filing the question away. I want you to notice what I did there. I wasn't ambushed that night. I saw the collision coming from across the room, and I chose, deliberately, to let it arrive on its own terms. I just didn't know my mother was about to set those terms herself. I slipped out to the hallway for a moment, quiet, dim lighting, the noise of the party softened to a hum. I took out my wallet. Unfolded the thing I've carried for 11 years. Soft at the creases, my 20-year-old handwriting still marching down the page, routes, margins, the $14,000 plan. And at the bottom, in my father's careful script. No, go get a serious job, Dad. Underneath that, smaller, my mother's slanted edition, she's never going to amount to anything. I stood in that hallway and read it the way I read it maybe once a year. People assume I keep it to fuel resentment. They're wrong. Resentment is a fire you have to tend, I don't have the time. I keep this page for the opposite reason. I keep it so I'll never again make the mistake I made at 20, asking the two people least equipped to see me to approve whether I was allowed to become myself. I didn't keep it to stay angry. I kept it so I'd never again ask the wrong people to sign off on my worth. I refolded along the old creases, slid it back into my wallet, next to the corporate card that could now cover that 14,000 without a second thought. Then I straightened my coat and walked back into the ballroom. I didn't know it yet, but the page in my pocket was about to come true out loud. By the time I returned, my mother had noticed Andrew Finch. You could see the calculation light up across her face. She knew who he was, of course she did, the operations director, the senior leader, the man whose opinion mattered more to her than almost anything in that room. To my mother, Andrew Finch wasn't a person. He was an audience. The exact kind of important professional she'd spent decades wanting to impress. And here he was, at her event, with her family arranged around her like a curated display. I watched her decide. Watched her abandon the speech schedule mid-step and start moving through the crowd with purpose. She caught Vanessa by the arm, turned, looking for me, and found me near the hallway. There you are, she said brightly. Come, both of you, I want Mr. Finch to meet the family. She began steering us across the floor toward the man in the gray suit. The man I'd sat across from a dozen times. The man who knew precisely what I did for a living. My mother thought she was walking her daughters toward someone she could impress. She had no idea she was walking herself toward the one person in the building who could dismantle her favorite story at the seams. I could have stopped it. Peeled off, found the restroom, let the moment pass. I didn't. I let her steer. Because some stories, once a family has told them long enough, need to be said out loud in front of everyone to finally break. As we crossed the floor, Vanessa fell into step beside me. Got one more line in, low under the music. Let Mom do the talking, okay? Don't bring up the truck thing, don't embarrass Dad on his night. I told her I wouldn't bring up the truck thing. Said it calmly, evenly. Vanessa's never known what to do with my calm, she reads it as coldness, as scheming. Because she can't imagine a version of quiet that simply isn't afraid. I mean it, she said, speeding up, just say logistics if he asks. Logistics. There it was again. The family-approved word, the box they'd built for me and kept me folded inside. The difference was, I knew what was on my page. They'd never bothered to read theirs. We were 10 feet from Andrew Finch now. He'd set his drink on a table, he'd seen us coming, all three of us. My mother in the lead, her best professional smile ready. His expression had gone careful, watchful, the way a smart person's does when they sense two stories about to collide. He looked at my mother. He looked at me. And I gave him, this time, the smallest nod. Go ahead, it's all right now. My mother arrived in front of him, glowing. Her hand swept back to present us. And she opened her mouth to introduce her daughters to the most important man in the room. Mr. Finch, my mother said, and her voice had the polish she saved for exactly these moments, the book club voice, the voice that had narrated my smallness for 11 years. I'm Andrea Hoffman, Dennis's wife. I'm so glad you could make it, we're so proud, 37 years. Andrew shook her hand, said something gracious about my father being a cornerstone of the operation. My mother lit up, because praise of the family was praise of her, and this was going exactly as she'd pictured. A few of her friends had drifted closer to watch. My father, sensing the shift, came in from the side to stand near his boss, near his wife, near the center of the moment. The whole cast had assembled without anyone directing it. My mother set her hand on my shoulder. I felt the familiar weight of it, the steering hand, the presenting hand. And these are our girls, she said. This is Vanessa, our finance manager, married, 2 beautiful children, just wonderful. Vanessa did her modest little wave. Then my mother's hand tightened, almost imperceptibly, on my shoulder, the way it always did right before she said the line. She turned me a half-degree toward Andrew Finch, like setting down a lesser dish and apologizing for it. The ballroom noise carried on around us, glasses, laughter, slideshow music. Andrew's eyes moved from my mother's face to mine, and held there. And I understood, with a strange and total calm, that I was standing at the exact center of the thing I'd carried folded in my wallet for 11 years. And that my mother was about to read it aloud without knowing she held it. And this, my mother said, with a little sigh she'd perfected over decades, the sigh that did half the work, is our other daughter, Claire. She paused. She always paused. Well, bless her heart, she never really amounted to much. We're honestly not even sure what she does anymore, something with trucks, I think. A couple of the book club friends laughed softly. The kind, indulgent laugh you give a mother being charmingly honest about her disappointing child. Vanessa smiled into her wine. My father looked down at the carpet, the way he always did, removing himself from a thing he wouldn't stop. And me? I didn't move. I didn't flinch or flush or look for the exit. I'd heard this sentence in 100 living rooms and parking lots, and I'd built an entire life in the spaces between its repetitions. So I simply stood there, in my good coat, and let it hang in the air of that rented ballroom, under the crystal lighting my mother loved, in front of the 60 people she'd gathered to admire her family. She never really amounted to much. The words went out across the circle and landed exactly where she aimed them, at the feet of the most important man in the room. And Andrew Finch, holding his drink, looked at my mother. Then he looked at me. And something in his face began to change. I watched it move through him. Recognition, disbelief, the slow arithmetic of a man realizing the woman being introduced as the family failure was the woman whose conference table he sat at 4 times a year. Andrew didn't say anything right away. The silence he left was the loudest thing in that corner of the room. He looked at me. Glanced down at his phone, which he'd pulled halfway out of his pocket, some reflex. I knew, without seeing it, what was on the screen. The quarterly summary I'd sent last week, my name at the bottom of it. The name of the woman whose company owned the company that owned the plant that had organized this celebration. He looked at the phone. Looked back up at me. Then looked at my mother with an expression I can only describe as careful. The look of someone who's just realized they're holding a match in a room full of something flammable. My mother misread all of it. She read his silence as agreement, his stunned face as polite discomfort. And it emboldened her. I know, she said, filling the quiet with a small laugh, patting my arm. We don't like to dwell on it. Every family has one, right? We love her anyway. Every family has one. She actually said that. Out loud. With her hand on my arm. To the owner of her husband's company. Andrew Finch set his drink down slowly on the table, the way you set down anything you're afraid you might drop. He straightened, turned to face my mother fully. I need to pause here. Because there's something you have to know that the room didn't. The week before this event, a document had crossed my desk. A retirement package, 37 years of service, full pension, performance bonus, part-time advisory offer to retain institutional knowledge. The name on it, D. Hoffman. My father. His exit from the company, his last major payout from a career of steady work. It required my approval, because everything at that level required my approval. And here's what I did with it. Nothing. I let it move through exactly as the plant's HR had structured it, by the book, on its merits. I didn't inflate it out of guilt. I didn't reduce it out of spite. Though I'll admit, in that quiet hotel hallway, with the folded page in my hand, I felt the spite available to me, like feeling a cliff edge without stepping off. I signed it the way I'd sign any 37-year employee's package. Fair, clean. And I told no one. So as Andrew Finch turned to correct my mother, I was the only person in that ballroom who knew that my father's entire retirement, the security of his final chapter, the dignity of his send-off, had already passed, untouched and unharmed, through the hands of the daughter he'd told to get a serious job. He didn't know it. She didn't know it. And the strangest part, the part I'm still sorting out, is that I'd protected him before I had any reason to forgive him. I just hadn't decided yet what to do with that. Mrs. Hoffman, Andrew said. His voice was quiet, but it had the kind of quiet that makes people lean in, the kind that turns heads at nearby tables. I think there's been a misunderstanding, a pretty significant one. My mother's smile stayed on, but a crack ran through it. I'm sorry. Andrew glanced at me. A real glance, a question, an asking of permission. Because he was a decent man, and he understood, even half a second into this, that something delicate, and not his to break, was sitting in front of him. I gave him the nod. The last one. The one that said, go ahead, it's time. Around us, the circle had gone still, the way groups go still without deciding to. Book club friends sensing a shift, my father's colleagues drifting a step closer. Vanessa's wine glass frozen halfway to her mouth. My father standing very straight at the edge of it all. The slideshow music played on, oblivious. Andrew took a breath. He looked at my mother, this woman who had just called her daughter a failure, to his face. And you could see him choose his words carefully, not to wound her, but because the truth he was about to say didn't need any help wounding. He wasn't angry, he wasn't enjoying it. He was just a plain-spoken man who'd been handed an unbearable error and couldn't, in good conscience, let it stand. Ma'am, he said slowly, clearly, so there could be no mistaking it, I don't think you know who your daughter is. And the whole corner of that ballroom, 60 witnesses, a slideshow, a banner that said 37 years of dedicated service, went quiet enough to hear the ice settle in someone's glass. Your daughter, Andrew said, steady and clear, owns the company that owns Hoffman Lang. He let it sit. Didn't embellish, didn't need to. The sentence did its own work, rolling out across the circle and past it, the way a thing said too loudly at a quiet event travels table to table. Her company signs my paycheck, mine, and every person in this room who works that plant, including Dennis's. My mother's face did something I'd never seen it do. The smile stayed frozen, because she didn't yet have a replacement expression ready, but everything behind it fell away. That's, she started, and stopped. No, that's not, Claire is in trucking, she drives. She doesn't drive anything, Mrs. Hoffman, Andrew said, gentle now, almost sorry. She's the owner, Orion Systems Group. They acquired our parent company 3 years ago. I sit across a table from your daughter every quarter and report our numbers. He paused. We all answer to her. 3 years. The number landed in the circle, and you could watch people do the math, watch them rewind 3 years of this family's certainty and find it had been false the entire time. A book club friend put her hand to her mouth. One of the floor guys said, audibly, wait, the owner? And my mother, who had spent decades building her worth out of other people's good opinion, stood in her beautiful rented ballroom and felt the whole structure of the evening invert around her. While the daughter she had just dismissed as nothing stood quietly in a good coat and said not one word. My father had been standing at the edge of the circle the whole time. Now he turned the rest of the way around, slowly, the way someone turns when they're afraid of what they'll see if they turn fast. 37 years of being a company man, of measuring worth by the steadiness of a paycheck and the seriousness of the job. All of it came to rest in the look on his face. Because the serious job he told me to go get, the one he'd written across the bottom of my plan, was the thing now signing his. He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time in 11 years. Which, I suppose, he was. Not the slot I'd been filed into. Me. Claire, he said, and his voice was not the certain voice from the power outage story. It was small. You've, for 3 years? The whole hall seemed to wait on my answer. I thought about all the ways I could have said it. The cruel way was right there, available, sharpened by a decade of him glancing past me. I didn't take it. I just looked at my father, at his celebration banner and his slideshow and his crew and his small, cracked voice, and I told him the plain truth, level, quiet. The way I tell everyone things now. 3 years, Dad. That was all. 3 years. The man had clocked in and out under my ownership for 3 years, had retired under a package I'd personally approved, had told a coworker an hour ago he wasn't sure what his daughter did. And now he knew. And the knowing emptied him out, right there, in front of everyone he'd spent 37 years belonging to. In the exact theater of respectability my mother had built to honor him. The room tilted. The way a room does when the official story everyone's been politely agreeing to suddenly can't be agreed to anymore. The whispering started low and spread. My mother's book club friends, the audience she'd performed her whole life for, were the first to step back, physically, a half step each. The way people back away from a thing that's no longer what it claimed to be. I watched one of them, a woman named Diane, turn to another and murmur behind her hand. I knew exactly which direction that murmur would travel by Sunday service. Vanessa had gone the color of paper. I almost felt for her. She was watching the family hierarchy she'd spent years propping up, the one that kept her at the top and justified every loan and favor, collapse in real time, in a ballroom, in front of everyone she knew. The math of her whole position had just changed. And she knew it. And she couldn't say a word. Lewis Grant, my father's oldest friend, was the only one smiling. He caught my eye across the circle and gave me a slow, private nod. His eyes were a little wet. And at the center of it stood my mother. The crystal lighting she loved blazing above her, 60 witnesses arranged around her, her monument to respectability tilting on its foundation. She had built the perfect evening. Filled it with the perfect audience. And she had handed them, with her own hand on my shoulder, the one truth she'd spent 11 years burying. Then she found her voice. And the voice that came out was not the book club voice anymore. This is a stunt, my mother said, too loud. Several heads at nearby tables turned. This is some kind of stunt. You've done something to humiliate us, on your father's night, of all nights. Her voice was climbing, losing its polish, going ragged at the edges in a way I'd almost never heard. Because my mother's whole power had always lived in her control. She rounded on me. The book club mask was gone now. What was underneath was raw and frightened and furious. You did this on purpose. You always had to be the center of everything. didn't you? Even as a child, you couldn't just let your father have one night. Her hand was shaking. A few people drifted closer, not away now, drawn, the way people are drawn to a thing coming apart. What did you do? Buy the company just to humiliate me, just to prove some point? And here's the thing I want you to notice. Because it's the whole shape of how this works. As my mother got louder, I got quieter. As she lost her footing, I kept mine. She was doing all the things a person does when the floor gives way, the volume, the accusations, the rewriting of the story in real time to make herself the wounded party. And I was simply standing still, in a good coat, with my hands folded. Letting her show the entire room what she actually was when the performance failed. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. The power in that corner had already changed hands. And the changing of it didn't require me to be loud. It only required me to be exactly as calm as she was frantic. So I waited. Until she ran out of breath. And then, in the quiet she left behind, I finally said something. I didn't do anything to you, Mom, I said. My voice was low, but the hall had gone quiet enough that it carried to the back tables. I bought a company 3 years ago because it was a good company and the deal made sense. Your husband worked there, that part one knew. I let that settle. She opened her mouth. I kept going, still quiet, still even. Because I'd waited 11 years to say this, and I wasn't going to waste it by shouting. I never told a single person in this family what I do, not you, not Vanessa, not Dad. For 3 years, I let you keep your story. I drove home. I ate the pasta salad. I said logistics. And I let you tell people your other daughter never amounted to much, because correcting you stopped being worth my time a long time ago. A beat. And tonight, you walked me across this room, with your own hand on my shoulder, and you said it to the one man in this building who answers to me. I looked at her. And I was not angry. And I think that was the part she couldn't bear. That I was not angry. You didn't get caught by me, Mom, you got caught by the truth. It was always going to be standing in whatever room you finally said that sentence in. Somewhere behind me, a chair scraped. No one else made a sound. My mother stared at me. And for the first time in my life, I watched her search for a script and find that there wasn't one. That she had performed her way through every social situation for decades, and there was no performance for this. For being publicly, completely wrong about the worth of your own child. It was Diane, the book club friend, who broke the silence. She did it almost kindly, in a small, unsteady voice, the voice of a woman whose whole understanding of a family had just been rearranged. Claire, honey, she said, what is it you actually do? And I realized, standing there, that no one in that room, in 11 years, had ever simply asked me that and waited for the answer. So I told them. I didn't boast. I didn't list revenue or square footage or employee counts. Because the people who need to say those numbers out loud are the people who aren't sure of them. I just said it plainly, the way I'd say it to a new banker or a new contractor. I founded a company called Orion Systems Group about 10 years ago. We started with one delivery vehicle. We now own and operate logistics and manufacturing businesses across 7 states. 3 years ago, we acquired the group that owns Hoffman Lang, where my father has worked for 37 years, and where most of you in this room draw your paychecks. I'm the owner, that's what I do. For years, my mother had said, we don't tell people what you do, like my work was a stain to be managed. A thing to keep folded out of sight. And now I had said exactly what I do. Out loud. Under her crystal lighting. To her audience. And the only thing that had ever been embarrassing about it was her insistence on hiding it. My mother sat down. Not gracefully. She found the edge of a chair behind her and lowered herself onto it, like her legs had stopped being reliable. My father, across the circle, put one hand flat on the table to steady himself. And looked at the daughter he'd filed away. And said nothing at all. Because there was nothing left to say that wouldn't make it worse. My mother spoke from the chair. Her voice had lost all its volume. What came out was the closest thing to honesty I'd ever heard from her. Do you have any idea, she said, not looking at me, looking at the floor, what it is to raise a daughter people whisper about? Your father drank, the whole town knew. They whispered about us in the pews, about the Hoffman girl whose dad couldn't keep it together. I spent my whole life climbing out of that. I couldn't have it start again, not with my own child. And for 1 second, I saw her. Not the matriarch, not the verdict giver. But a frightened girl in a church pew who had built a fortress of respectability out of shame, and then spent 40 years defending its walls. Even from her own daughter. Especially from her own daughter. Because I was the crack she was most afraid would let the old water back in. I saw her. And I felt the pull of it, the old daughter instinct to soften, to make it okay, to take care of her feelings. But then she lifted her head. And ruined it. If you had just told me, she said, and the accusation was back, I could have been proud of you. You took that from me. She turned her own fear into my failure. The way she always had. And the second of sympathy closed like a door. So I said the last thing I came, without knowing it, to say. You told me to get a serious job, Dad, I said, turning to my father. I let the old words land where they belonged. I went and built the one that signs yours. And Mom, I'm done waiting for either of you to call it enough. I don't need you to sign off on my worth anymore. I haven't for a long time. I just finally stopped pretending I did. I didn't storm out. Storming out is for people who lost the room. I hadn't lost the room. I set my water glass down on the table, next to Andrew's abandoned drink. Buttoned the good coat. The circle parted for me without anyone deciding to part it. I stopped in front of my father on the way out. He looked up, whatever he was bracing for. I didn't give it to him. Congratulations on 37 years, Dad, I said. I meant it. Because 37 years is 37 years, and it was real. Even if he'd spent the last 11 of them not seeing me. I hope you enjoy the retirement, as your daughter, not as your owner. Then I walked toward the doors. Andrew Finch caught my eye as I passed and gave me a small, grave nod. The nod of a man who knew he'd just detonated something, and was sorry for the blast radius, but not for the truth of it. Lewis Grant fell into step with me at the coat check. The only one who followed. He squeezed my shoulder at the door. Your dad's a good man and a fool, kid, he said quietly, always was, about this one thing. You did right, not being cruel about it, took more spine than yelling would have. I thanked him. Then I went out into the cold parking lot. Got into my car. And drove the few miles back to the hotel. Because I'm a guest in that town now, with my own door to close. I didn't cry in the car. I want to be honest about that. I'd done my crying about this family years ago, alone in the cab of a delivery truck. What I felt, driving back, was something quieter. And much harder to come by. It was finished. 3 days later, my father drove the 2 hours to our offices in Harrisburg. Showed up in the lobby. And now it was his turn to be the one who didn't belong in the room. My assistant buzzed up, uncertain. There's a Dennis Hoffman here, he says he's your father. I told her to send him up. He came in holding his cap in both hands, the way men of his generation hold a cap when they're out of their depth. He stood in the doorway of an office larger than the house I grew up in. And he couldn't find a place to start. He didn't lead with an apology. I noticed that. He led with worry. I came about the package, he said, the retirement, the pension and the bonus and all of it. He turned the cap. I figured, after the other night, after what your mother said, after all that, I figured you'd want to reconsider it, pull it, maybe, and I wouldn't blame you. I came to say I'd understand if you did. And there it was. The thing that finally told me everything about how my father saw the world. And how he saw me. He had driven all this way, not to say he was sorry for 11 years, but because he was afraid the daughter he'd dismissed would do to him exactly what he expected a dismissed person to do. He thought I would punish him with money. He thought that was what power was for. Because that was what it had always been for, in his world. Sit down, Dad, I said. He sat on the edge of the chair, cap in his lap. Your package is safe, all of it, the pension, the service bonus, the advisory offer, if you want it. He blinked. I signed it myself last week, before any of this happened. I signed it the way I'd sign it for any person who gave that company 37 years. Because that's what you are to the company, fair and clean. I didn't inflate it, and I'm not pulling it, it was never going to be a weapon. He sat with that. I could see it not computing. Because in his world, power and money were the same thing. And the daughter holding both had every reason to use them on him. And was choosing not to. Then, why, he started, and stopped. I don't understand. Because the package was about your 37 years, I said. It was never about you and me. I keep those things separate, that's the whole job, Dad, knowing which is which. I let a silence sit. Then I gave him the only hard thing I had left to give. Gently. Because it was true. You're safe here as an employee, you earned that, but the part of me you'd have to earn back, the daughter part, that one doesn't come with the pension. That one you let go of 11 years ago, at a kitchen table. I'm not the one who has to find it again. He left a little while later. Still holding the cap. And I don't know yet whether he'll do the work. Or whether he'll drive home to my mother and let the version of this where I'm the villain harden over the truth, the way their stories always do. That part is not up to me. And I've made my peace with the not knowing. But I'll leave you with the thing that 11 years in one ballroom finally taught me. And I hope it saves you the trouble of learning it the slow way. You can spend your whole life waiting for the people who dismissed you to finally sign off on your worth. Or you can go build the very thing they respect. And stop needing the signature. That's my story. One sentence, 60 witnesses, and a paycheck none of them knew I signed. If you've ever been written off by the people who were supposed to believe in you first, let this be your reminder. Go build your own table. And stop asking for a seat at theirs.